Item 5 is the deputation, and today we have Gareth Moore and Brian McDaid here from the Derry Call Centre Campaign. We've had a motion previously about this issue. It's an important issue across the city, and it impacts a lot of workers across the city as well. So I've already explained to our guests that they have 10 minutes to present the slides, which everybody should have visibility of, and then we'll open it up to the floor for a question and answer session. So Gareth and Brian.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much for inviting us to speak today. So we're just going to basically start off with a brief outline as to what the Derry Call Centre Campaign is and why it was set up. And then we'll get into some of the more specific issues impacting workers within the city. And so the Derry Call Centre Campaign was established by former Derry Call Centre workers to help advocate for and support call centre workers within the city and region. They would do this through challenging perceptions of call centre work, often very negative, calling on improved pay and conditions, and providing opportunities for call centre workers to develop and improve their employability both within and without the sector. Following a recent announcement of redundancies expected at FirstSource, the Derry Call Centre Campaign focused its efforts on offering free support and guidance to FirstSource workers. We have also tried on many occasions to engage directly with FirstSource without any response to date. We have provided advice and guidance on over 50 occasions to staff members who have had questions and concerns around the process that the business was failing to provide answers for. That being said, some questions do require an answer from FirstSource. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So in January of 2017, we had the announcement that FirstSource had expanded the strategic partnership with Sky, securing a 10-year contract. At the time, this was reported as safeguarding the jobs within Derry within FirstSource. That was in 2017, so it should have secured the work until 2027. In the summer of this year, we had the announcement that FirstSource's contract with Sky was to be terminated and to be relocated to another employer. Next slide, please. On your screen is a list of contract services which FirstSource provided to Sky, which have been impacted by the recent redundancy announcements. Particularly relevant to us is those impacted on Derry and those in the northwest, such as the Sky Service, noise sales, Sky Service, noise sales, and the ROI service. There was also impacts in Belfast through the ROI loyalty and value and ROI service. And then across the UK, home workers, so this is people working remotely. So we'll both have people impacted here in the northwest, the wider north, and also across the UK. And those were the Sky Service, noise sales, and the ROI service. It was obviously disappointing news, and as we began to engage with staff and look into the decisions behind this announcement, we started to find some strong connections that were built up between FirstSource and its supposed competitor, which has taken over the work, Results CX. So in the few years running up to this announcement, which again resulted in breaking the previous 10-year contract, we've seen numerous senior members of FirstSource management transition into Results CX. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to go through the kind of high-level positions where we've seen the connections between FirstSource and Results CX3. And this all seemed to happen just prior to the announced redundancies, which is seeing the work being transferred from FirstSource to its supposed competitor, Results CX. Next slide, please. So as we see there, we had the person who was the MD and CEO of FirstSource from 2012 to 2019, then transitioned immediately after FirstSource into Results CX. So they went from the MD and CEO of FirstSource to become the MD and CEO of Results CX in 2019 and still remain there. Secondly, we've got the Chief Revenue Officer for FirstSource between 2017 and December of 2021, so literally a few months prior to the announcement. and they had transitioned over to CX3 to become the MD for Europe for Results CX from, again, December 21 until present day. Next slide, please. Thank you. We've also seen the VP of HR for FirstSource transition over to become the Senior HR Executive for Results CX. And certainly from the comments of the workers employed there, it seems like that particular person is having a massive say in the negotiations between FirstSource and its workers. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, FirstSource workers have reached out to us with concerns about the access and the influence of the Results CX HR team is having over their redundancy negotiations with FirstSource. I have today received a statement on behalf of numerous FirstSource workers, which I'm going to read to you. And that states, both FirstSource and Results CX senior management have been ignoring a solicitor's letter sent on behalf of FirstSource staff outlining why they would not accept to go through the proposed hub transfer to Results CX. This proposal would be in the interest of all parties involved. FirstSource just last week cancelled a meeting with one political party at last minute when the party requested that site reps be present on the call. They advise that political parties try to arrange a call. They may be put in contact with a marketing VP or a PR firm who have no knowledge of the proceedings apart from reading from a script and are not involved in the consultation process. FirstSource senior management keeps saying they're not involved in the process, but FirstSource appear to be very close with Results CX when this shouldn't be the case. This could well be based on the numerous ex-FirstSource senior management figures now holding key positions within Results CX, and they may still hold influence over FirstSource senior management. Due to the way FirstSource senior management is acting, increasing numbers of employees are now opting for redundancy instead of the possibility of redeployment within the company, and are quite prepared to opt for the top transfer, even though Results CX management have advised all those impacted by redundancy that Results CX have no intention of operating a centre in the UK. Next slide, please. So, in order to address the concerns raised by workers, which so far FirstSource has failed to do, we're asking on the Council to support us and the workers in trying to get answers from FirstSource. I'll simply say at this state that when these situations arise, we do within this city and region need to set up some kind of force where we can rapidly and coordinately respond to these concerns. We put together a few suggestions which we feel would help get answers from FirstSource in the immediate, but also how we could help support any worker that may be impacted in a similar situation in the future. Next slide, please. So as I stated, we would ask the Council to put questions to FirstSource, particularly in relation to the connections which have built up between FirstSource and CX in recent years. Next slide, please. So we do have a number of suggestions as to how we can plan for future activities of this kind and how we can better respond to them when they come up. Next slide, please. I'll revert back to these in a moment. Next slide, please. So in terms of how we move forward and make sure that we're better prepared in the future to support people, we have suggested that a task force be set up, which will include both political representation through the Council and also trade union representation coordinated through the Derry Trades Council. So workers have told us that at the initial announcement, they did receive some political support. I know some politicians had engaged with FirstSource to try to understand what was happening. However, in those discussions, it seems clear that we didn't get to the nuts and bolts behind this decision, nor did we discover any of the concerns that have since been raised over the preceding months. So for us, that raises a concern that although the political representation at the time engaged with good faith, we believe that it would have been much more productive had they had the expertise behind them from the trade union movement. The Derry Call Centre Campaign is an advocate for call centres. We know that through proper management and engagement of staff and decisions that impact their role, It is possible to have good working environments and people can feel safe and supported. Call centre workers, many of which were essential workers throughout the pandemic, deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. For example, they should not be timed on how long their toilet breaks are. They should be allowed at least a few minutes break between calls and an opportunity to have a say on decisions that directly impact them, and also the opportunity to develop themselves professionally and personally. So I'm going to run through the suggestions, and that is effectively, we suggest that the council sets up a working group engaged through the Derry Trades Council that allow a task force to respond rapidly and coordinatedly to any announcements that suggest there is a risk to jobs within this city. This task force should go further and also intervene when we are made aware of any poor working conditions or pay, or where we feel, which seems to be an underlying issue across this region, that workers within this city and region are underpaid compared to their UK or Irish counterparts for doing the exact same work. Sorry. So in conclusion, I just want to state that we don't have a magic wand to make everything perfect, but we are very confident that we know how to make things better. We can't let political divisions stop us from uniting. We want every party, every member of the council to unite behind workers in Derry, not just to save jobs, but to improve pay and conditions. When concerns are raised about potential job losses or poor pay and conditions, as we've seen in examples such as McDonald's recently, we need a rapid and coordinated response, and that's what we're suggesting to council. I'll pass you over to Brian, and he'll speak a bit more generally on the call centres in Derry.
Thank you, Gareth. Just out of courtesy, Chair, how many minutes do we have left?
-1.
Okay, I'll be quick. As a fellow councillor who sits and chairs these kind of committees, I know how important time is, but I'll be very brief because Gareth has comprehensively covered what needs to be covered. But a bit from my experience, I've been involved in the trade union world for nearly 20 years, and the majority of that has been in the finance sector. And people have this perception that the finance sector is a lot better a place to work than compared to the public sector, etc. That is far from the truth. We have a lot of workers, and probably 99% of workers, facing the same challenges that all workers within Ireland and the UK face. But call centres is an area that we've been supporting for a number of years. Call centres are very common in the finance sector. Frontline workers dealing with customers day to day, week to week, month to month. And what happens is that becomes more pressurised, that place. And if we don't have a union there, the working conditions, the workers' rights disappear, working conditions become draconian. So Gareth's gone through many examples, but the one issue for me that needs to be addressed here is the pay disparity. So, for example, we recognise and represent workers within Computershare, a company that's based here in Derry. We've been trying for a number of years to get them to address the pay disparity, but each time we raise that issue, we get the same response. The cost of living is cheaper here than it is across the water. That is nonsense. We've got the stats to prove that the cost of living is affecting everyone in the same way. So what I've done, I've said to Computershare now, we tried to, work with you. If you're not going to do that, we're going to go public and talk about it. That's one example, and I'm sure there's many other examples out there. But as Gareth says, what we need to do as unions, you as elected representatives of the community, is come together with us, look at ways that we can engage with employers to ensure that workers in there have the rights they deserve, have working conditions that help them flourish, have pay they deserve, and have opportunities to progress within their careers. Because at the moment, that doesn't exist in a lot of call centres. So I hope you take on board what's been said today. I'm happy to speak to you separately, happy to come and speak to you again here. But as I said, Gareth's covered everything you need, and I hope you take on board and agree to what we proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Gareth, and thank you, Brian. So I'm going to open it up to the floor, or if anybody would like to comment or ask a question from the members that have joined online. Anybody? Councillor Harkin.
Thank you, Chair, and Thank you, Brian and Gareth, for coming in today and doing the presentation. And I think that what you've been able to kind of discover in terms of the way the first source management has operated is, I would describe it as corruption, and the secrecy, the trying to keep everybody at arm's length when questions have been asked, and it must be very, very frustrating for yourselves as the initiators of the Derry Call Centre Campaign, and for Aegis, and for the workers themselves. So one question I would have for you is, I know that a lot of workers have been in contact with you, and if you could maybe talk a bit about that. And also, I think some workers have been in contact with solicitors trying to get some sort of establish what their rights are in terms of voluntary, in terms of the redundancy pay. That would be very helpful as well, just to draw out the picture. I propose now that we endorse the proposal that the campaign is putting forward. I think if we can set up a working group, it can look at all the proposals that you have there in terms of a task force, and working with unions and working with groups of workers who are facing these types of conditions. We're seeing, Brian described the situation that Computer Share, we have the situation at Seagate that you're well aware of. It's very disappointing that Invest NI have played such a minor role, if any, in terms of being concerned about what's happening at First Source or at Seagate. I mean, these are huge corporations that have made a lot of money and have had a lot of help from the corporate wing of Stormont. And it would be helpful if the Secretary of State was coming to visit Derry and actually intervening and playing an active role to stop these companies from just walking away. So, fully support your proposals. And, I know the campaign is very, very difficult because the redundancies are kind of happening. I do see this as a platform for continued organising because, there's lots of people in Derry in the Northwest who have these types of jobs. So thank you again.
Thank you, Councillor Harkin. Before, I know that you've made a proposal, you don't have a seconder. I'm going to wait until we have the discussion, and then we can discuss the proposal at the end. So the next indicated speaker is Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Gareth and Brian for their presentation. I don't know whether I should or shouldn't declare an interest as a former employee of First Source, but your presentation and your campaign to date has clearly been very noticeable, and I think your suggestions or your asks of council are make a lot of sense whenever we're looking at paying conditions, job losses and things like that, because we often find that whenever these things are announced, we're on the back foot and we're trying to firefight and react to what's going on. And as Sean has said, a lot of the time, well, his bigger partner hasn't said it, but he's sort of pointed towards it. A lot of the time, whenever we're trying to do this, the decision's already been made by the company, and we're trying to manage that, whilst also trying to manage the fears of workers. And unfortunately, in our case here in the city and district, it's large numbers of workers that we're dealing with. For those that work in First Source, beyond no illusion, it's quite a difficult job. There's lots and lots of pressure. I remember when I worked in First Source getting what's called an RD, a recorded discussion, because my after call was less than 5 seconds. That's 5 seconds, less than 5 seconds to leave a note, hang up and take another call. And if you're doing that for 10 or 12 hours a day, it can be quite, it can play on your own mental health. Make no mistake about it. But that's the type of pressure that those people are under and have been under. And to be brought onto a call very unexpectedly with senior management, 500, I believe, or near that figure, were brought onto the call that day to be told that, we're jobs are at risk. And as I say, at that point, it was very clear that it didn't matter what anybody said, that those jobs were going, and it was firefighting at that stage. Gareth, I think it was, whenever he was mentioning the asks that's in the deputation, touched on and said, we don't need political division getting in the way. And I fully agree with you. But I do think that within this council, we've got from all of the political parties and the independents, when it comes to issues like this, we're very good at working together to try and support people. So I don't think that political division, whenever we're talking about people's jobs and terms and conditions, is going to be a big, huge issue that we're going to face. As a party, we have always worked with the Trades Council. We'll continue to do so whenever issues like this come up. I do see a role for some type of a task force, but I see it more being led by the Trades Council and looking for support from elected representatives. And I know that that has been forthcoming and all of these issues. I would just like to understand a wee bit more what you expect of the task force and how you expect that to be managed, because I think it says in one of the slides, there's a wealth of knowledge and talent within the Trades Council. There's a huge amount of it, and we don't want to see that being diluted or being lost by a task force, which may be caught between red tape in terms of what the council can do and how we can carry things forward. So I would just like to understand how you see the task force working, and then we'll, Chair, with your permission, we'll come back to the proposal from Councillor Harkin once we understand that. But we're not against it at the moment. I just want to understand a wee bit more about it.
So I've got two more indicated speakers, Councillor Donnelly and then Councillor Jackson, and then you can advise on your vision for the task force.
Chair, just on a second, Councillor Harkin's proposal. I have spoke to some workers from First Source, and for them it's inevitable that, you know, but when I put this ideas to them, they do think that it's a good idea and it's an important idea. Not particularly for them, they're busted. I think for them at the minute it's down to unions negotiating a good, well, not a good deal, but as good a deal as that is possible. You know, when these firms come here, there's a whole hullabaloo about, you know, and they are welcome and they're welcome jobs. But unfortunately, some firms, you know, when they've got all the benefits and you know, and got everything they've got out of workers, sometimes, you know, they're not as forthcoming in workers' rights and that. So any workers that I have spoke to thought that this would be a good idea for people who remain there in First Source, because there will be jobs there, and for other people in similar type of employment. So happy to second the proposal. Thank you.
Councillor Jackson.
Good Chair, and welcome to Brian and Gareth. And from our perspective, we're fully supportive of the trade union movement, and we see that issues in relation to workers' rights and the improvements in workers' conditions have all been won and hard won through the trade union movement, and that's something as a party we're fully supportive of. And I know Councillor Tierney alluded to political division, and not, like, when we're talking about people's jobs and the services that they're providing and income that they're relying on, there's no room for politics within that. And so I don't foresee that there's going to be too much political division in relation to the need to stand up for workers. It's a process of doing that. There's like quite a lot of what you've presented to us today we would be fully supportive of. But it's whenever we talk about the role of council, and we don't want to. I want to be clear that we need to respect the role of trade unions, and there needs to be a clear distinction around what the role of a trade union is and the role of a local council. I would see our local council as a key player in terms of engaging with current employers, any potential employers, and to try and attract investment into the Northwest. They create jobs, they create better paid jobs, and in turn, better conditions for workers. I want to see our council officers engage with those investors, those companies. They talk about the barriers, the investment. They identify any gaps in the skill base, and then work in partnership with our skills, our universities and further education sector. They address and they fill those gaps. And with all due respect, I don't want to see our council officers being involved in any sort of campaign that could potentially put off investors. And we want to send a clear message that Derry and Strabane is open for business. We want to create jobs. We don't want any potential employer being fearful of their internal business being discussed in an open forum in a council chamber. That's not what we're about. Completely understand that there's a key role for our trade union movement. They be in and having those challenging discussions, and certainly if there's any help that we can provide as a political party, they support our trade union movement throughout that, but we would have serious concerns about setting up structures that could potentially put off investment and put jobs in jeopardy through what is undoubtedly well-meaning proposal, but there's ramifications that we're very mindful of, and our position is clear. We want to send a clear message that Derry and Strabane is open for business. We want to attract investment, and we want to support our trade unions to ensure that the jobs that are created are well paid and the conditions are adequate. So in relation to the proposal, it's not necessarily a political division, but we're far from convinced that that's the pathway that's going to achieve any sort of real outcome for workers in the city and district. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. And the final indicated speaker is Alderman Cook.
Thanks, Chair, for letting me in. And thanks to the boys too for the presentation. I just want to say that we would be fully supportive of the boys as well. I'm just going to concur with more or less what the other speaker said, but I would be interested as well just to see what role council will be taking in the groups as well, just more or less what Councillor Tierney said. So thanks very much for letting me in.
Thank you, Alderman Cook. So I think that everybody has had their say, and Councillor Tierney had asked Gareth and Brian to share their vision for the task force, because it hasn't been clearly defined. There are varying opinions within the council. So I too would like to hear what you think, how it would operate, what its aims and objectives would be. I'm not sure a council working group is probably the best terminology for it, because what we consider a working group versus what yourselves would consider a working group could be vastly different. If it was a body set up with the Derry Trades Union Council that invites political representation, not council officers, that, I think, could work. But I don't think it would be a working group that is set in statute by council. But I'd be really grateful to hear your views on it.
Thank you, Chair. And totally understand the questions and the concerns from some of you about a potential working group. What I can say from my experience, as I alluded to earlier, I'm also a councillor in Yorkshire. And one thing we do is when you have an emotive issue in your community, you look to address it with all those that can influence that issue to the best of the community. So, for example, Better Buses is one that I'm on at the moment. Antisocial behaviour is another working group. But you're right, you have to define the roles within that working group for those that are there. Council, local community groups, trade unions, for example. So what we do, and this can be what part of the proposal, is when we set up a working group, if it's agreed, if any council is involved, there's a terms of reference of what your role is within that working group. You know, if there's any conflict of interest, you step away. But for us, the reason we've asked for you guys to be involved is because you're influencing the community. If we, as unions, yes, we campaign, we're the forefront of any campaign as unions to get better rights for workers. But if we can't engage with the employer and, you know, we've reached a dead end or a barrier, we need help and support in that. And that's where you guys come in because you have the influence. So for me, that's where I see your role in it. And also to give us the advice of the community as well. You know the community better than myself. So if I'm involved in the group, you can tell me more of different angles of what we need to, you know, what we can expect, what would be the best campaign, what wouldn't be the best campaign. It's just feedback. It's not a out there working group. It's just something behind the scenes to help us achieve what this community deserves.
If I can come in there as well. So first of all, I mean, in terms of the Trades Council running the working group and asking for support from politicians as and when needed, that's the status quo. That's where we are now. Nothing needs set up. That's already in place. So what we're saying is we've came across barriers in this campaign, specifically in relation to First Source, in terms of the employer not engaging with us, it not being a recognised unionised workforce. So are we saying that those staff, you know, if you're not the union, then you shouldn't get any help? What we're trying to do here is recognise that outside of a recognised employer, there's a lot of your constituents, a lot of people from this city who are directly being impacted by poor employers. And I appreciate the concern that we don't want to drive out investment, but we got to remember, who are we going to be challenging? So the only occasion you should be publicly calling out an employer is if they're a bad employer, and in which case you should be brave enough to call them out. And when we say we're concerned about the ramifications for investment, for employers, and that's why we don't want to involve ourselves, what about the ramifications for the people, for the workers? We already have a group in terms of the trade unions, in terms of the Derry Trades Council, who will advocate for workers. But the issue we want to address through this task force is a mechanism outside of the trade unions where people can still receive support. We've seen that political parties are willing when these announcements are made, because political representation has gone in, and you have spoke to the employers. And that's great, and that's in good faith you're doing that. But it became very clear that through no fault of your own, I don't mean this point as a criticism, but there wasn't the knowledge and the expertise that comes with a trade union movement to make those meetings worthwhile and meaningful. We came out of them saying, yes, First Source made these promises. First Source are going to look after the staff. First Source are going to be open and honest. And what have we seen? The complete opposite. To a point where workers, low-paid workers, have gone out of their own pocket to employ a solicitor to ask their employer a question, which they've still not received a response to. What we're saying in essence is something needs done. Employment is too important to this city, and the idea that we sit back because we're concerned there might be problems if we do something isn't acceptable. So we would suggest that we're here to say, as political representatives, you have a job to do. I know you are keen to do it, and we're saying, hey, let us help you do that job. Let's make sure that meeting is meaningful. Let's make sure that we give you the knowledge and expertise you need to make sure you challenge appropriately, that you know the questions to ask, the pitfalls that are going to come up. Just think back to that first announcement, those first meetings that some of your parties had with that business, and all the promises and how you came out feeling, no, they're going to do right by staff. And then look at where we are now. It didn't work. Either things have changed or you were lied to. That's where we are. So we need to recognise that process we've all been doing year after year in this city, trying to save jobs, and I know there's sincere intent to do so, I don't doubt it for a second, but we have to recognise that what we've been doing previously isn't working, and it's time to try something new. We're saying, use are the political representatives, use are the leaders, lead. And we will give you all the support, knowledge and expertise we possibly can to make sure you do the best possible job. And that's what we're asking for. Thank you.
Would anybody like to comment further? Councillor Hargan?
Thank you, Chair. Look, I think that there is, like, we're in a cost of living crisis. We have two major employers in Derry who have, I would say, done a lot of damage recently in terms of jobs, which is very, very unfortunate, and nobody wants to see that. And I think that for a lot of people, there's tremendous frustration, and people are losing their livelihoods as well. And there's a lot of people who are not sure what they're going to do next. And I think what we're talking about here is what council do. And I think that there's a perception that government doesn't do enough to support workers. Government does a tremendous amount to support business. I mean, that is not even debated anymore. So I think what we're being asked to do today is find a way for the council to be more proactive in standing up in defence of workers. So that the request, I think that, and I mentioned this to Brian and Gareth before, I think that if we can reduce the proposal to one, let's call it a task force, because I think that the four things that you're asking are reasonable. What role can we play in getting answers from First Source? Because they've refused to give you answers. They've refused to give political parties answers. That's just wrong. And clearly, that's why I was saying, what did InvestNI, what's InvestNI's relationship to First Source? Did they ask them any questions? Who has assisted First Source since they were here? So that's one request. Two is, I'm just going through them, when jobs are at risk, what can the council actually do? How can we look at job disparity or pay disparity? I think that that's a reasonable request that we can have a task force on and have some discussions about what more or what else can the council do. And look, our council already has decided to take very strong positions on workers' rights and social justice. I don't think setting up this task force in light of what's happened at First Source and what Brian and Gareth are telling us today will make much difference to how people, how some perceive us.
Councillor Mooney?
Thank you, Chair. I was just sitting listening, and I think I probably understand the concept of it, and I've got the concept in a way, but it's more interested probably in the mechanics of how the intended task force would sort of roll out. And would you advise it? I'm sort of thinking in the minute, would it be like an ad hoc basis if there was like interventions required? Obviously now the situation's First Source, but would it be the First Source is resolved and then there's no other matters on the horizon? So how does it engage? Do you come on the council and say, I need your intervention here, or we're in a dispute with X, Y, and Z. Things are working out, negotiations are protracted, we think we've come to a stalemate, and I think now we need to have this sort of political intervention of local council. Is that when he's intervened? Is this more of a situation? Because my mind is like a sort of ad hoc sort of institution or arrangement rather than a sort of, a fully full standing task force. And perhaps if you could maybe sort of tease that out for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. So yeah, I mean, I'm going to give you two opposite answers to that. So first and foremost, I mean, as I would envisage it, I see it as a task force or a reactionary force at its nature. But you'll see in there, and I've kind of put it as a few different proposals, but they all could fall into the remit of one task force. So yes, you have the initial response and reaction to when we hear of potential announcements, and just very loosely to give an idea of what day one might look like when that happens. So it could be where you seek a meeting with the employer, you sit down and through the trade unions, you'll have a series of questions that'll help you gauge what got them here. Have they taken the sufficient steps to try and mitigate, so reduce or potentially stop any actions that may be taken? You would talk about the support mechanisms that they're going to be put in place to make sure that staff are kept updated along this process. It's an incredibly fearful and stressful position for anybody to be in, especially as we're running up. Christmas is going to be around the corner. So we need to make sure that we're asking the right questions to begin with. Outside of that initial reactionary position, so what you might do when, let's hope we're in a position someday, no employers making any redundancies. Well, that's when we talk about, well, let's look at the other impacts. So, pay and conditions could be something which is reviewed. You can do that by engaging with employers across the city to understand what's the general standard of terms and conditions. Where does it lie? Where is it high? Where is it low? Is it impacting low-paid younger workers more than older workers, etc.? So there is the reactionary part of it, which is always have to be reactionary by the nature of it, because you're going to hear of a redundancy, you're going to react to it. But there's ongoing things that could be done around that engagement, around pay and conditions. As Brian talked about, that engagement around the disparity, where people are getting paid in this city and region far less, by thousands of pounds, far less money, doing the exact same job for the exact same company than somebody that's sitting there, maybe in the south or across GB. So these are legitimate questions. And again, I mean, I know some concerns that I appreciate. You don't want to be seen as just purely out there trying to beat down employers. We need employers. Without employers, we don't have workers. But again, this is about focusing on making things better. So it's not to say every employer must do X, Y, and Z, or we're going to be on their back. It's about engaging with them and understanding, is there a way, maybe through support, that we could get them to improve pay and conditions? But let's be honest, there will also be employers who are making an absolute mint, and they're doing that by paying their workers very little wage or conditions. We also have to be alive to the good employers in this town who are generally trying to give people a good standard of living. And those employers are undercut by the bad employers because they get to pay people pittance and give them no conditions and no job security. So when we're concerned about, employers, then what about the fact that the employers out there who are generally trying to give people an honest living to the best they can, try to be as fair as they can, are getting screwed over because we're allowing these bad employers to go ahead and undercut everybody. So we're creating a situation in which employment is incentivised to treat people badly and pay them poorly. This must be counteracted. We have to do something to try push back at this. And I suggested many years ago to this council, maybe not the same people here, if you don't want to, I'm not suggesting this here, but just a point to make, if you don't want to focus so much on the bad employer, at least start calling out the good employers. Start pointing out this guy's supporting our community because he's paying people a living wage. There's so much more we could be doing, from either side of the field. But ultimately, sorry to summarise your question, it would be in essence, at its heart, reactionary in terms of redundancies, or if there's major issues on conditions. We had the Equality Commission had recently set up an independent email address specifically for workers in Northern Ireland who are working for McDonald's, given everything that's going on there. We'll not repeat it all just now. But that shows you that crises can arise not just from redundancy, but from the conditions that people are being forced to work in. And this task force will respond to all those issues. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Gareth. Right, we've spoken about this for quite a while, and it's a very important issue, but we have a lot of other agenda items to get through. I'm conscious that Councillor Harkin has a proposal which is seconded by Councillor Donnelly, but I'm going to ask Councillor Harkin's permission if I may make a separate proposal, because there is a bit of vagueness here in terms of the purpose of the task force. I would suggest that officers from the council engage with the Derry Call Centre Campaign to establish a potential terms of reference for this working group with a paper to come back to for their committee, so the members are fully aware of the role, the responsibility. That's my proposal.
Chair, thank you. Two questions. One on your proposal. Would it not be the officers engaged with Derry Trades Union Council as opposed to the Derry Call Centre Campaign? because it's in the proposals that's on the paper, it talks an awful lot about the trade union council as opposed to the singular campaign. And the second thing, in terms of any working group, task force, or whatever you want to call it, being set up, what is your vision of the membership of it? Is it all elected councillors? Is it one from each party? What way do you see that? Or is that something now with your proposal that we'll see coming back from officers? But I'm happy to support your proposal and second it.
Thank you, Councillor Harkin.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just hear from Gareth and Brian about what they think of your proposal, that would be helpful.
So first of all, yeah, in terms of the Derry Trades Council engagement instead of through the Derry Call Centre Campaign, yeah, that is preferred. And again, through the Derry Trades Council, we've obviously got all the trade unions in the city. So, you know, there might be an issue that rises isn't specific to call centres, in which case it'd be better that way. And that's why we've proposed it in that regard. Sorry, there was a second question in regards to your own proposal.
I think there was one from Councillor Tierney about how many councillors were.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
There is, but if we're going to go with this proposal, I'm happy to see what the paper comes back and suggests, but it's whatever way you want it.
Yeah, so look, I'm comfortable with his, you know, sitting down. Like, I think the key to all this is the key principle of this. I believe that the trade unions and the council need to work together. So in terms of proposals, sitting down and hammering out the detail, I'm absolutely comfortable with that.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, a couple of points. I suppose I'm a wee bit confused in relation to the original proposal. Was suggested that because we know that there are engagements with political parties and the Trade Unions Council, and I know if there's any assistance that the Trade Unions Council requests from us, will never be found wanting. And if what is being suggested is that on an ad hoc basis, if the Trade Union Council calls on representatives from all political parties, not necessarily members of this council, but at any level of a political party, they will engage with the Trade Unions Council and support them in any way we can. That already happens, and if we confirm that up, 100% we're supportive of that. The question is in relation to council involvement, and whether it's council's role to take on the role of a trade union, because that's essentially what we're asking, and that's not what council should be doing. And it's going back to that fundamental point. As elected representatives and members of political parties, most of us will support trade unions. Most of us will, if there's a trade union campaign that we're asked to lend our support to, we'll support when we can. So there's no need for an additional structure. But if we just want to formalise and say and make that commitment that we're here, we've no problem in doing that. But it's when we're formalising and asking council to get involved is something that we've got difficulty with. It's not the role of council, and that's. So I just wanted to put it out there. If we were initially speaking about continuing and more formalising what already takes place, we've no issue with that. But if we're talking about setting up new structures that involves councils, then it's not our role. And with all due respect to the campaign, it's worth pointing that out, that it's not the role of councils to be stepping into that, the realms of trade unions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Jackson. And I think if this committee agrees to the proposal that we set up, the terms of reference, I would hope the terms of reference would clearly define the roles and responsibilities of the trade union members and the council members. Councillor Hargan.
Thank you. Yeah, look, in response to Councillor Jackson, I feel council should be an advocate for trade unions. I think it should be an advocate for workers' rights. I think it should make that its primary job. I don't think everybody will agree with that. And I think that in terms of government today, I think government is found wanting in terms of standing up for workers' rights. And we only have to look at working conditions across our district to see that. We've got the lowest median wage of any council district in the north. You know, we're not going to go through all the statistics, but clearly government isn't doing enough to be advocating for workers' rights and supporting trade unionism. And I think that that's what this is about. So I don't think that we will be taking on as a council the bargaining that a union does, or joining up with the ICTU, or getting involved in that level of detail. This is about when there is, I would call what's happened at First Source an emergency. I would call what's happened at Seagate, unfortunately, where we have advocated and we have participated, the same thing. So we already do this. So if the campaign, if Gareth and Brian are happy to support Councillor Farrell's proposal, I'm happy to back that as well.
Thanks, Councillor Horgan. Final speaker on this item is Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Chair, and I can understand and appreciate where Councillor Jackson's coming from, but I think what we sort of need to do is differentiate between the role of council officers on this potential task force or working group and the role of council members on it. And that's why I asked earlier about the membership of it, because make no mistake, if the Trade Union Council call a meeting for 7 o'clock tonight, there'll be a member, I would suggest, from each political party represented in this council at that meeting. If that's what you want, and as Councillor Jackson's already outlined, that already happens. But if what you're looking for is a representative of each political party and independents, and then a brand of council officers and trade union representatives sitting around the one table, that might be slightly more difficult, which is why I've asked earlier about how do you see the membership of this workforce or task force? What does it look like? Because I think that might help clear up some of the questions that's been asked. Hopefully, if we go with the chair's proposal, that'll be cleared up within the terms of reference. But it might make for an easier discussion here if we kind of had an idea of what it is that you were expecting from council members and then council corporately as a body, because I think it's two separate roles on this particular task force. Thank you.
Right. So I think we've debated this to an extent. So I think there's been no dissent in terms of the proposal. Council officers will engage with the Trade Unions Council to formulate terms of reference that clearly define the roles, responsibilities, purposes of the group, and a paper will come back for further consideration at this committee. Yeah.
With respect, I would like an answer to my question.
Can that not be hammered out in the terms of reference? So thanks very much for your attendance, folks.